Hello, hello, and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg, and I am here today to serve two purposes. I want to talk about whether or not I've met my reading intentions for 2022 and what my reading intentions for 2023 are. Just a quick note before we get into them. In terms of language, I use the word intentions because to me it feels a little bit less strict than goals. I like to have the latitude to change my mind and maybe have different priorities, because the reality is 6 months from now, my reading priorities may have changed. I may be pursuing different projects and things like that. I'm also a bit of a mood reader, so saying intentions instead of goals, it's a subtle difference, but it feels like it gives me the flexibility to feel okay if I change priorities later. And I feel like it gives me permission to do that, even though I don't really need permission. It's sort of like leaving the back door open in case I want to escape through it. It also puts less stress on me because I don't like feeling like these are things that I have to do. Reading is supposed to be fun. Remember, supposedly fun. So I don't want to put too much stress on myself. I want to keep it fun and loose and all of that, and that is why I say goal or intention instead of goal. And it's also why I use the term pile of possibilities to refer to books that I may read instead of a TBR, because to me a TBR sounds much stricter, like a thing that you have to get to. Pile of possibilities means these are books I may get to this year. So I've pulled a bunch of books as well for ideas, like a pile of possibilities, that the titles I might use to meet the 2023 reading challenge for the Montana Book Company. At the end of the video, I'll go through the list of prompts that they have and talk about how I am thinking right now I would like to meet them. And again, I'm giving myself the leeway to change my mind later. Let's start with my 2022 reading intentions, talk about how I did on those, and then we will talk about my 2023 reading intentions, and then we will go into the list of how I might do the 2023 Montana Book Company reading challenge. So my first reading intention for 2022 was the 2022 Montana Book Company reading challenge. Crushed it. I went down to the wire in order to finish it, but I did finish it. I sort of had the opposite tactic from Joel, and his was probably a little less stressful in the end. He front-loaded a lot of the reading challenges, so he was done, or mostly done, by the middle of the year. I took some time in the beginning of the year to work on some other projects that I wanted to do, so I really started putting effort in and intentionally focusing on it in the latter half of the year, and that's why I went right down to the wire. But I did it. I did it. So I'm saying I crushed it on that one. My second reading intention for 2022 was to work on my Pulitzer Prize project. If you're new here, and I know I have gotten a lot of new subscribers over the holidays, so if you're new, hi, how are you? Welcome. I am working on a project where I am reading all of the books that have won a Pulitzer Prize for fiction. I decided that I was going to do this, I think in 2019. Didn't actually read any Pulitzer books that year. And then in 2020, I only read one. In 2021, I read one. So that is why it was an intention for last year. I really wanted to make some progress on this project. How did I do? Crushed it. So I went from 2 books read for the project and 1 single deep dive video to 5 books read for the project and 7 videos total. The reason there was only 1 video created at that point was that I read Gone with the Wind is the book that I read in 2021, and I was so irritated by the experience of it that I did not actually put the video together until 2022. So I did a good job on that one, and I'm proud of that, because I don't want to rush my way through my Pulitzer Prize project, but I also don't want to take forever doing it. So I'm glad that I made some good progress, and I hope that that will continue. My next reading intention was to transition away from Goodreads and toward Storygraph. Crushed it. So I actually crushed this even harder than I thought I would. My idea when I set this as a reading intention for 2022 was to slowly transition from Goodreads to Storygraph. I had been thinking that for most of the year I would operate both a Goodreads and a Storygraph. And what ended up happening is by February, I loved Storygraph so much that I just stopped using Goodreads. I still have an account on Goodreads, but it's basically abandoned at this point. I have not updated anything since early 2022, so it's just kind of sitting there, and I'm debating if I want to delete it in total this year or if I want to just let it stand a little bit, because since the community on Storygraph is growing right now, sometimes if I want to know if, say, Sean the Book Maniac has read a book, I might still peek on Goodreads to see if he has rated it, or I could just ask him. But without actually reaching out to him, that is sort of like a backdoor way of doing it. So I've been holding on to the account just for that, but I did unexpectedly really well on this. It didn't even become a transition. It just became me slamming the door on Goodreads. I love Storygraph, and the fact that I loved it so much just sped up the process of letting Goodreads go. My next reading intention is a little more complicated. So it was to focus on other parts of the LGBTQ plus spectrum in reading. This is sort of a goal that I have been working on a lot in recent years, especially since I started the channel, because I read a lot of queer literature, but I have a tendency to focus on the G in the LGBTQIA plus. As a gay man, that tended to be the area in which I focused the most. So a couple of years ago, I set a reading goal, because I hadn't switched to intentions at that point, to increase representation of the other areas. And I did really well on that. This was not a specific goal. Again, it's an intention. So I actually didn't even know how I had done on it when I looked back at what my reading intentions for 2022 were. So I did a little bit of research. And again, Storygraph made it very simple because they give you stats. It's so good. So I looked at my 2022 reading stats on Storygraph, and according to it, of the 100 books that I read in 2022, 44 of them were LGBTQIA+. So helpful, because I didn't have to go through 100 books to decide, is this one LGBTQIA? Is it not? So that made it really helpful. I could just immediately had the number, and I clicked on that line of the bar graph. LGBTQIA plus books, by the way, were the dominant genre in which I read in 2022. So I clicked on the bar for that one, and it showed me all 44 books I read that had qualified for that. So I just went through those, and I have not checked to see if this math works out. This is quick math done between me and Google to try to figure out some quick numbers. So, we're going to go with it. This is really informal anyway. I didn't feel like checking my math or anything like that. But I did a quick count. So it might be my math. It might be just the fact that I did this quickly. And I actually did a lot better on this than I would have guessed. I was fully prepared to find that of the LGBTQIA+, the letters in the acronym, I was fully prepared to find that I had done the most in the G, gay, again. That turned out not to be the case. The one I did the most of was lesbian. So of the 44 books, 15 of them were lesbian in nature, and that's the most. So a quick math says that is 34% of the LGBTQIA plus books that I read. And again, 44 books out of 100 is almost half of the books that I read in 2022. And of that almost half, 34% of them dealt with lesbian characters or lesbian authors. So that made me happy to see. And then the G, gay, came in second place with 12 books, not far behind. And quick math says that is 27%. I read 3 books that dealt with bisexual characters. That counts for roughly 7%, again, according to quick math, with the help of Google. And 5 books that had either transgender authors or transgender characters or dealt with transgender experience, and that is roughly 11%. Queer or questioning, I hear it defined different ways. But what I decided to do is, because there were a couple of books that didn't have easy categorization, because either they have characters who could fall into multiple categories, or they are just not easily definable. Like, I'm thinking of The Membranes by Cheetah Way, and I'm loosely pointing to where it is on my shelf. It's somewhere around here. And That book is not easily categorized as an LGBTQIA plus book. It's definitely queer, but you can't really put it in a box. So things like that I counted as a Q. And I also looked for books that had representation of multiple different categories, like Heartstopper, actually. Sure, the primary couple in that book is gay men. However, there's also a transgender character. There's a lesbian couple. So for that reason, I put it under Q for queer instead of lumping it into one of those categories or multiple categories. So that left me with 7 books in that category, and that is about 16% with rough math. I didn't have any books that qualify as intersex. That is actually something that I had already been thinking I would try to do in 2023, try to hit that category and do that. I had 2 books that counted for asexual representation, which is roughly 5%. So I did a lot better than I thought I would have. And again, it's an intention I just try to think about, and really I just measure it at the end of the year when it's over and I'm looking back. It's not a specific goal where I'm trying to meet a certain threshold or actively think about through the year. I mostly just want to monitor my progress in this. And so in that regard, I'm going to say crushed it. I did really well on that. The next reading intention I had for 2022 was to be more intentional with book hauls. So every month I do book haul revisits where I look back at that particular month at all the book hauls I have had in that month in the past. And one thing it really helps me do is think about how likely I am to read a book and the type of book I purchase. And I do think I crushed it on this one because there were a couple of months toward the end of the year where I had read either did read, had read, or almost read all of the books that I brought into my library. So I think that pretty clearly states that I'm doing better in that regard. December and January were really large book hauls, but they were for a very specific purpose. So we'll get to that in a different video. Maybe my book haul for the month of January. I'll talk about that a little bit. But it is even the large book haul is with intention. So I think I did really well on that. I'm going to say I crushed it. My final reading intention for 2022 was to get back to closed captioning for videos. This is the only fail on this list. I did a little bit better in the beginning of 2022. And then, life happened and I got really busy and I fell away from it. And then toward the middle of the year, I was really trying to make an effort to get back into it. And as soon as we lost Guinness in June, I never really got back on the wagon with closed captioning. It is something I want to try to emphasize moving forward because I want my videos to be accessible. And I know the closed captions that are auto-generated are not very reliable. What I need to really do is get more of a set schedule for creating videos. I think that would be really helpful for me because part of my problem right now is I try to film videos in the morning before my workday starts. And then once the workday starts, I spend almost the whole day editing a video. So by the end of the day, I'm ready to upload it to the channel and schedule it for the following day. So it will actually post the following morning. And that's a sort of chaotic video upload process. It's made it really difficult to fit captions in because the only way to get captions in is to allow the video to upload and either have a script, which I never do because I don't really script my videos. So I either have to have a script ready or I need to let the video fully process before I can edit the closed captions that are on the video. And that can take 45 minutes. It can take hours. So, and I've never really been able to figure out how or why it might take longer. But that makes it almost impossible to fit it into the process before the video is actually posted. And once the video is posted, I've only rarely been able to go back and do it. So when I came back from Italy, I decided I was going to try to not put as much pressure on myself to post videos, and maybe I would take a little more time. In practice, that hasn't quite worked. And a lot of the time, because my work schedule can be so chaotic, I end up not able to take that extra day. Like there were a couple of times toward the end of the year where I was able to film a video, and instead of posting it the next day, I held it and took the next day to edit the closed captioning, and then the following day after that it would post. But that's a 3-day upload process, and when you already have a chaotic work schedule, it doesn't always work. So I'm going to try to figure something out, but it was a fail for 2022. So let's talk about my 2023 reading intentions. A lot of these are going to sound really familiar. Now, I did debate if I was going to set a book number goal or a quantity goal for 2023, because I really thought about it. Last year, I did set a book number goal and I set a pages goal as well. Both of them, to me, are really arbitrary. It's almost a farce because, to me, neither number actually matters all that much, because you could read 5 books in a year and they could be really quality, or they could mean something to you. You know, pushing yourself to a certain number isn't necessarily going to make your reading experience better. It's not necessarily going to make you a better person. You could read a lot of small books to get to that number, or you could read some big books, and then you're making it harder for yourself to hit a threshold. So you could focus on pages instead, but that to me is even more... I don't know why I sort of arbitrarily in my mind have decided that the page one is a little less commonsensical, because to me, in the end of 2022, I read a lot of shorter books. I really went through a moment where I just really enjoyed short books. Maybe it was because the end of the year was really busy and there was a lot of things that were going on, but I just really enjoyed that. And I don't want to have to stress myself out like, oh, I'm doing really well in terms of quantity, but my page number is suffering. So I picked one and I decided to set a quantity goal. But even then, I always set it at an achievable number because, again, I don't want to have to stress about that because the number doesn't actually mean anything. I did increase the arbitrary number that I put in over last year. Last year, I set it at 50, knowing that I would crush it. But this year, I decided to make it at least something of a challenge. I made it 70. Should still be doable. But at the end of the day, this is a really loose intention for 2023 because... And I might not do it at all in 2024 because to me, it's just silly. So I'm talking about it here because I ultimately did decide to do it, but I feel like it's silly. It's not actually an intention. It's just something that I'm doing and thinking about how I think about it in the future. So I guess the intention is more to evaluate whether or not that matters. And there's no quantifiable way of measuring success on that. But that's okay because, again, I take a low-pressure approach to reading intentions. So I just wanted to mention that. My next one is the 2023 Montana Book Company Reading Challenge. I am going to do it again this year, and I'll talk about how I plan to meet it once I'm done talking about the rest of my reading intentions for 2023. I am putting the 2023 Queer TBR tackle on here because that is another priority that I'm going to be partaking in 2023. I'll put a link to the video where I talk about that down below, and I'm really excited to get started on that in February, and I hope you are as well. I am also going to take part in the E.M. Forster read-along. This was sort of spearheaded by Jen the Librarian. I'll put a link to her video announcing that down below. I've already read the first book for that, and look forward to the rest of the year. So those are both already in progress. I look forward to finishing them. So those are the... I don't usually like to participate in like readathons or read-alongs. They kind of stress me out. So I think that is as much of that as I wanted to do. However, I am also going to say that I want to work on my Pulitzer Prize project. And one way I'm going to do that, you'll see when we walk through here, I've thought about ways where I can meet the prompts for the Montana Book Company Reading Challenge with books that are part of my Pulitzer Prize project. And I think that'll be a lot of fun. I want to focus on other parts of the LGBTQ plus spectrum when reading again and again. I just want to measure at the end of the year to sort of monitor my progress and see if there are, like, I already knew I needed to do better with intersex. So this year I would like to rectify that. But yeah, it's a way of monitoring how I'm doing more than I want a specific number. So I want to continue thinking about that, and I want to continue being intentional with book hauls, and I really want to get back to closed captioning because I need to figure out a process. It's probably going to take some time. Please bear with me, but I'm going to try to figure that out. So those are my reading intentions for 2023. Let's start running through what I am thinking about doing for the 2023 Montana Book Company Reading Challenge. They actually have less prompts than they did the year before, but they've laid it out nicely so you can write things in and check off things as you work through. So it actually crosses 3 pages. It's 29 prompts for 30 books total. So the first one is read a nonfiction or fiction book by a transgender author about trans characters, Don't You Dare with Rowling, or transgender issues. I decided to tie this in with the 2023 Queer TBR tackle, and I'm going to include Stone Butch Blues by Leslie Feinberg because I'm going to be reading this for the Queer TBR tackle. And again, I don't like to stress myself out, so I figure as much as I can cross this intention with other reading intentions for the year, I think it's going to be better for everyone. So Stone Butch Blues, which is a sort of transgender pioneering classic, should be a good way of meeting that prompt for the reading challenge and also still participating in the 2023 Queer TBR tackle. So the next one is finish a book you DNF'd, did not finish, in the past couple of years. This is the first one where I'm going to incorporate my Pulitzer Prize project. So after it won the Pulitzer Prize, and before I had decided that I was going to embark on a project to read all of the Pulitzer books, I had a copy of The Goldfinch, didn't like it, and bailed about halfway through, and then don't have a copy anymore. I found this at a local used bookstore, so spoiler for my book haul for January, and this is the book that I am thinking of doing for this prompt. However, my stated intention for my Pulitzer Prize project is to do all of the books in physical format, but in cases where I have attempted to read a book before and failed, like this or The Overstory by Richard Powers, I'm going to allow myself to try audio and see if that will help me get through them. So, Goldfinch will be coming up on audio at some point this year. That's my plan. Again, I could change it. I could even do The Overstory if I really want to have a Pulitzer crossover, because both of those were things that I attempted to read within the last few years and failed. So whichever one I do for that would probably be on audio. The next prompt is a book about deafness or with deaf characters or by a deaf author. So here's a book that is by a deaf author and has deaf characters, True Biz by Sarah Novick. Really looking forward to reading this. I wanted to read this last year and didn't get around to it, so I feel like this is the perfect kick in the pants to get to this book this year. I also have a book that I recently covered in a book haul revisit called Safest Houses by Alex Jeffers. I'm loosely pointing to where it is on my shelf. If I don't do True Biz, I could do that one because the protagonist of that book is a coda, a child of deaf adults. But I think True Biz is the way I'm going to go for that. Next prompt is read a book where the setting is on an island, fiction or nonfiction. Now, The Spirit of the Ruckus came into me when I saw that. I don't know why. And I almost wanted to interpret it in a, not a malicious way, but a bit of a troublemaker way, which is funny because I am not a troublemaker at all, to my core. But the twist that I would have put on it was finding a book that is either set on Manhattan, which is an island, or Long Island, where I am originally from, because it's an island. But it seems to fly in the face of the intention of it a little bit, so I ultimately decided not to do that. But The Spirit of the Ruckus did come into me for a moment, and I thought about it. This actually is an interesting place where I could incorporate my Pulitzer Prize project, because Tales of the South Pacific by James A. Michener is a Pulitzer Prize winner. It was adapted in part. It's a collection of stories set in the Pacific on islands during World War II, and parts of the stories were adapted into the musical South Pacific. So this would be a really interesting way of meeting that prompt, and that is probably the way I'm going to do it. I'm going to let The Spirit of the Ruckus stay away. Next is a novel written from the perspective of an animal. My immediate thought for this was The Tale of Despero by Kate DiCamillo, but then I was looking into it because Joel was thinking about options, and I found out about a book called The White Bone by Barbara Gowdy, which is told from the perspective of elephants. And I'm going to let Joel read it first. He really loves elephants. I'm worried that a book that has elephants in peril because it's about them on their migration, and of course that is a dangerous thing, I'm worried that it would stress me out. So I'm going to let him read it and tell me if it will stress me out or if it's worth doing. The reviews are great, so I may very well do this, but I'm going to let Joel do it first. And if it's something that's really going to stress me out or bother me, then I'm going to fall back on The Tale of Despero, because that is told from the perspective of a mouse, and we'll be fine. And that takes us to the first prompt that I've already finished, a book recommended by one of your favorite authors. I had gotten Ducks by Kate Beaton from the library. 2 Years in the Oil Sands. This is a graphic memoir about the author's time in the oil sands of Alberta, Canada. I first found out about it from one of those end-of-year lists in which it appeared, and the thing that really convinced me I wanted to read it is that Alison Bechdel gives it a blurb on the back cover. So I'm interpreting a book recommended by one of your favorite authors to be that blurb, because that is kind of one of the things that made me say, all right, I really want to give this book a try. So I'm already done, and Ducks is the way I got there. The next prompt is read a book with an asexual character. So this is a great opportunity to continue expanding out into the other realms of the LGBTQIA spectrum. I did beat the prompt last year, which was to read a book by an LGBTQIA author, by deliberately choosing the book Loveless by Alice Oseman, which has asexual representation, because I wanted to focus in on that. So now I have another excuse to do it. A book I had thought about, if I didn't get to Loveless, was Let's Talk About Love by Claire Can. That's probably the one that I will do for this prompt. The audio of that is on Scribd, and that's probably how I will do it. The next one is read a book that has been challenged or banned in your local state or area. So I have two options for this book, or this prompt rather. I Googled books that have been challenged in Montana, the state where I live. One of them is I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. I've had a copy of this book for ages and haven't gotten around to reading it. And I tracked down a copy of the audio, or I'm on hold for a copy of the audio. I don't remember which, but she reads it. And that, to me, sounds amazing. So this has been challenged in the state of Montana and makes it qualify. And it's a book I've been wanting to read for a very long time. So that would be perfect. If I want to incorporate my Pulitzer Prize project, I could do The Big Sky by A.B. Guthrie. And the reason that would qualify for my Pulitzer Prize project is that The Way West by A.B. Guthrie is a Pulitzer Prize winner, and it is a sequel to The Big Sky. And in cases where a book that won the Pulitzer Prize is a sequel, I am going to try to read the book that came before it. If a sequel was written after it won the Pulitzer Prize, or if a prequel is written later, I'm not obligating myself to do it. But The Big Sky was published first, The Way West came later. So, oddly, The Big Sky was challenged at a school in Montana because of language. So, I could do it. I'll probably do Maya Angelou. But again, if I want to incorporate my Pulitzer Prize project, this would be another opportunity to do so. The next one is read a fiction or nonfiction book about social or political activism. This is broad. Could be a how-to, a history book, or a novel. I'm going to go with a history book, something that Joel read last year and really loved, and which I would really like to catch up to. The Deviants War, the homosexual versus the United States of America. This is primarily the story of Frank Kameny, who started, I can't remember if it was the Mattachine Society. Yes, the Mattachine Society. He was fired from NASA for being gay and became an activist after that. So, perfect. I am likely to try to seek this out on audio, just because I tend to like to do nonfiction books on audio instead. But I think this would be a perfect way to meet this prompt. Next is reread a book from your formative years that you thought was so good then. So I have, again, two ways I could do this. The first thing that jumped to mind is Matilda, which was my favorite book when I was a kid. So I could certainly do that. I have a copy. But again, if I want to incorporate my Pulitzer Prize project, I could do To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, because I read this for the first time in 9th grade. Formative years to me, I'm thinking about this in the Michelle Obama way. We are always becoming. We are never done developing as a person. So formative years could mean any time in your life. It could mean multiple things. So formative years could be when you were a child. It could be when you were a teenager. It could be when you were thinking of coming out. So I'm going to think of it in either a book I loved as a child, which would be Matilda, or I'm going to do my Pulitzer Project and get to Kill a Mockingbird because I love this book. I've reread it multiple times, and I think it's interesting to reread this book because different parts of the book speak to you at different ages, is what I've found so far, and it will be interesting to see which part of it hits me now at this stage. Next is read a bookseller recommendation you would not normally dream of reading. I don't have an answer for that. I have to talk to a bookseller. That's the only way to meet that prompt, and I don't have an answer for it right now. Read a duology or the first 2 books in a longer series. So, all of the options I came up with for this do not involve a duology. I'm thinking of like the series perspective. So, there are 3 authors who won a Pulitzer Prize for a book that was in a series. Obviously, A.B. Guthrie is one, but I would be counting him for a different prompt on this. So he's out of the equation. But Conrad Richter won a Pulitzer Prize for a book called The Town, which was the 3rd book in a trilogy. John Updike won 2 Pulitzer Prizes for books that were, I think one was the 2nd book in the 4-part Rabbit series, and the other one was for the final book. So at some point, according to my own rules, I need to read all 4 books in the Rabbit series. Don't really want to, but at some point I have to. So, by my own rules. And then Booth Tarkington won a Pulitzer Prize for The Magnificent Ambersons, which is part of a trilogy called the Growth Trilogy. So, haven't decided how I'm going to meet that, but it will probably be in one of those ways. And if I get burned out on my Pulitzer project, I can find like another duology or another book in a series, or 2 books in a series that would help with that. The next prompt is read a book of poetry from a poet whose work you have not explored yet. If I'm sticking with stuff I already have in my library, I'm going to do The Man with Night Sweats, poems by Tom Gunn. I believe I heard about this from Jen the Librarian. Joel has read it, but I have not, and I've never read another book of poetry by Tom Gunn. So it's sort of a natural solution to this problem that's right here. It's only small. Most poetry collections are really small. So it seems like a really easy answer to that. So I will likely be turning to that. Next is the second prompt and final prompt that I have already finished. Read a nonfiction book about the natural world, and I am turning to a Pulitzer Prize winner, but not her Pulitzer Prize winning novel. It's Josephine Johnson, The Inland Island. I got this from the library, so again, spoiler for my January book haul. I ordered myself a copy. I loved this book, really great. Very glad I read it. I'm very glad I own a copy, and I'll put a link to my Pulitzer video about Josephine Johnson down below where I read the novel now in November. She's a fascinating woman, and clearly I have enjoyed following her other work as well. The Inland Island is a fantastic book. So if you need a recommendation for that prompt, you would be doing just fine by choosing that one. Next, read a book by an author writing during the Harlem Renaissance. Obviously, we mean a Black author. Well, just so happens, Erica from The Broken Spine gifted me a copy of Cain by Jean Toomer last year. This is a Harlem Renaissance book, and actually this book turns 100 this year, so that's an even more compelling reason to get to this in 2023. So that is probably what I will do for that prompt. Next is novels set in the near future where the impacts of climate change or global warming are present. Cli-fi. I did not know what to do for this. I did Google books that feature climate change, and The Parable of the Sower came up by Octavia Butler, so I might do that. I don't know yet. Book written by a female philosopher. Do the Google, they exist. I have not decided what I am going to do for that. Actually, I want to talk to the people at Montana Book Company before I really decide on that. So, haven't decided what I will do for a female philosopher. Read a book you know you should probably read, but have been avoiding. Obviously, there are definitely some Pulitzer books that I could pull into this prompt. I didn't write any down because I filled out so many of the other prompts with them. So there was a prompt that was similar to this last year, and the solution didn't actually come until November, and then it came pretty organically when I did Jane Eyre. So I'm gonna hope that the same thing happens again, and my answer comes to me organically throughout the year. A book about a musician, about music, or by a musician. I don't have an answer for that one. There is a Pulitzer book that would qualify. The Mambo Kings Play Songs of Love, but again, I'm not gonna... I almost didn't even want to put it down because I filled so many of these prompts with Pulitzer books, and I feel like if I do all of these Pulitzer books, I might be burning myself out in a different way. So I might think about another one, but that would definitely work. And case in point, book about HIV or AIDS, fiction or nonfiction. I was thinking of putting The Hours by Michael Cunningham in there because there is a character in this book who has AIDS. So I could use a Pulitzer book to meet that prompt. We'll see how many of these I actually get to. Prize winner from 2022. Any book prize will do. I have two options. So I really wanted to read The Seven Moons of Molly Almeida, which won the Booker Prize last year, and I haven't gotten to it yet, so that would definitely qualify. But I also am hoping to read The Netanyahus, An Account of a Minor and Ultimately Even Negligible Episode in the History of a Very Famous Family by Joshua Cohen before the new winner of the Pulitzer Prize is crowned. This was the winner from last year. So because there is a bit of a time crunch on this one, if I'm going to manage to read it before the new Pulitzer winner is announced, I might do this for the prompt, because if I do it, I'm just going to put it on the list. But if I don't, I'll probably turn to The Seven Moons of Molly Almeida because I want to read that book anyway. So I have two options, one involving the Pulitzer Project, one not. Read something funny, maybe a book by a comedian, one of those comical mysteries, or a memoir by someone who makes you laugh. We need funny. I haven't decided how I'm going to meet that prompt yet. I'll figure it out. That one seems like it'll be pretty easy to figure out on the fly, so I'm not going to stress about it too much. Read a memoir in essays. Any bookseller worth their weight in bookmarks can point you in the right direction here. They had the same prompt last year, and honestly, the book I did for it was okay. Maybe I'll have better luck this year. I have an idea, but I want to talk to a bookseller, so that I'm going to try to get an idea for. Read a book by bell hooks. I don't know which one I want to read. If you have read bell hooks and have recommendations, let me know in the comment section down below. That might also be one that I talk to the people at Montana Book Company about, because I know I should read a book by bell hooks. I am glad that they're giving me the kick in the pants to do it. I don't know where to go. So if you have thoughts, let me know. Otherwise, I'm just going to ask them about it. Read a cookbook or book written about food, cooking, or by a chef. Read a cookbook, you say. Why, yes, some have so much more in them than just recipes. And I love that they incorporated that, because that is very true. Sometimes it's fascinating to work through a cookbook and just read the stories that come before each recipe, because it can be fascinating. And I love that. I would probably do a memoir. Kwame Onwuachi, who was a contestant on Top Chef, wrote a memoir about being a black chef in kitchens, and that is probably what I would do for it. But I love the idea of doing a cookbook for it, so I don't have an answer right now. Read a book by an Indigenous author. Here is another place where I could do a Pulitzer book, Housemaid of Dawn by N. Scott Momaday. This is the first book by a Native writer to win the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction. This is a beautiful, beautiful edition of the book. So I am planning to do that. We'll see how that goes, because again, I've really loaded this up with Pulitzer books, and I might get burned out on that if I do all of them. Read a true crime book. Note, sometimes folks write bad books that exploit victims. Try and find something that takes itself seriously and deals with the topic professionally. I love that they added that coda, because that's how I tried to meet this prompt last year, by doing something that does not exploit victims or sensationalize the crime. And I got a lot of great recommendations for what to do for that, so I'm actually going to go back through them and try to pick based on those, because I got a lot of really good ones. I just haven't done it yet, so sorry. But yeah, if you have more recommendations, let me know in the comment section down below. Here's a tricky one. You choose a category for next year and read a book in that category. Please write out the prompt and the book you read. I have not decided what I want to do for that. It'll come to me. I'm going to try to let it happen organically. And the final one is attend an author event at your local bookshop or online. Maybe read their book too. So the difficult thing about this one is that a lot of author events were online during the pandemic, but they are really moving back to in person, because I wanted to look at, say, The Strand and see what their events are, and they're pretty much all in person now. I also have a bit of a time zone problem. So where I live, Montana Book Company is an hour and a half away from me. It's difficult for me to attend one of their events. So I'm going to have to really think about this and how I can meet that, because there are bookstores in town. They do have events, not that many, never been super interested in them, and I would rather support Montana Book Company with an event. Shopqueer.co, which I recently discovered, is doing an author event with the author of My Government Means to Kill Me in February. I'd have to buy a copy of the book from them. I have an audio of it, but I found out that the book has footnotes, and I might want to read the book instead for that. So I'm thinking about that one, but this is something I'm really going to have to figure out, because where I am, and given my time zone for a lot of the bookstores that I'm interested in, it's a little difficult. I don't finish my workday until 6 p.m., which makes it difficult to get to author events or just like anything during the day, basically. So those are all the prompts. Those are how I'm thinking of meeting them. I would love to hear what your thoughts are if you are participating in the Montana Book Company 2023 Reading Challenge. I will have a link down below to where you can find the challenge on Storygraph. If you do it on Storygraph, you just have to remember, there's a link to where you can get the PDF of this. Just remember, get the PDF and either fill out the PDF and email it to the people at Montana Book Company before December 30th, or put it in the mail. But plan to get it there before December 30th, because I believe they are closing it on December 30th this year. So you can find that down below. Just remember that if you do the challenge on Storygraph, remember to get them a copy of your list before the end of the year. So again, let me know if you are participating, what you will be doing for some of these prompts down below. If you have recommendations for things that I don't have an idea yet, let me know in the comment section down below. I'm going to leave it at that so this doesn't get too long. As always, I really appreciate your time, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.